Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Chrysalis. Our goal for this podcast is to introduce and discuss psychological concepts in the context of the real world. And today's podcast is another one of our roundtables where we gather a group of experts to weigh in on one particular concept and we discuss how it impacts our everyday lives. So the concept for today is self-compassion. We're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, and how you can practice and benefit from it. So I'm Dr. Michelle Quist. I'm an assistant teaching professor at Penn State, and I'm here with three of my colleagues. First, I've got Dr. Angie Leroy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Angie Leroy. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Rice University in Houston, Texas, and I study the mind-body connection. Specifically, I look at how our social connections with other people and our emotions impact our mental and physical health and well-being.
Fantastic. Welcome, Angie. We also have Dr. Chelsea Young.
Hello, I'm an assistant professor at Rowan University. I'm a social psychologist, and I study social influences on alcohol use behaviors in college students.
Great. Welcome, Chelsea. And then we also have Dr. Jenn Bryan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenn Bryan, and I work in mental health education, and I'm also an assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine.
Awesome. Welcome, Jenn. Jenn is actually going to be the one to teach us about self-compassion. So, Jenn, tell us what self-compassion actually is.
So, self-compassion is just that. It's feeling compassion for yourself.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Backing up a second, compassion is empathy, which is being able to put yourself in another's shoes with the desire to alleviate or reduce suffering of another.
Okay, fantastic. So generally we would feel compassion like for other people, right?
Well, it's a lot easier. Well, I think it's easier to feel compassion for another, such as a friend. A good example is I got a call earlier this week from a dear friend. She has a master's degree and she works full time during the day, but she's just buried with student loans. So, to be able to pay off her student loans more quickly, she's working a second job at a busy restaurant and she works there at nights and on weekends and never has any time for herself. She called me to talk about the stress. I just wanted to hug her. It was so easy to see how hard it was on her. It would be hard on anyone. We talked about different ways that she could just take a moment to find little bits of time to take care of herself, such as calling me between jobs or finding some time to enjoy some tea or a nice bath after she got home.
So I was just thinking, so that's compassion that you feel for another person as opposed to self-compassion.
Yes. Now, something that struck me after I got off the phone, I remembered a time when I was crazy busy. It was before I knew about self compassion. I was working 60 plus hours a week. I would be in my office till midnight most nights. I was really struggling to learn statistical coding. I was just thrown into this environment that I was supposed to be learning all this. And who knew that a psychologist was supposed to learn coding? I didn't. So my inner dialogue was really nasty. Things that I wouldn't say to another person, but they were constantly going on in my mind. It was just frustration with, I was the only one that couldn't understand this. How stupid was I? I was telling myself I was so weak that I was exhausted, even though I was working 70, 80 hours. I would just constantly tell myself to suck it up. And, oh, look, there you go. You made another mistake again, idiot. I couldn't see how hard it was on everyone. It wasn't just hard on me. And I felt really alone and isolated. And now I can see that it wasn't like a realistic expectation for me to be able to just pick up coding in a week or two. And of course, I was going to struggle with it. It's a whole different language that I was learning. And it takes time. It's really easy to get in that spiral and be our own worst critic, but we don't have to be, or at least we can tone it down a bit.
So would you say that it's fair to say that self-compassion involves like setting the same standards for yourself that you do for other people, or like making the same allowances for yourself that you do for other people in tough situations?
Oh, absolutely. Hold yourself to the same high standards, but it's also allowing yourself to see the whole picture of course, you're not going to be able to learn a new language in a week or two. Or if you're out and your toddler has a meltdown, you can't control your toddler. You can do your best, but they're still having these boiling up emotions and It's going to be embarrassing and awful for you in the moment, but it's also out of your control.
So, kind of like if I saw someone with a toddler having a meltdown in a store, I wouldn't call them stupid or something like that. I would feel compassion for them that they're obviously having a hard time and that they're embarrassed. And so I should extend that same courtesy to myself.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit more about basically just the context of self compassion? Like, what is it made up of?
Okay, so self compassion is comprised of three domains: self kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So, self kindness is being nice to yourself when you've had a rough day and being tolerant of your flaws. It's realizing that sometimes things are hard and that's okay. Common humanity is knowing that mistakes are part of being human. No one is expected to be perfect. I'm not perfect. No one is. One of my favorite, well, I guess it shows how dorky I am that one of my favorite books is by the Institute of Medicine, and it's called To Err is Human. And it talks about people in medicine who are making mistakes, but people in medicine are absolutely brilliant, super competent people, but it happens to everybody. And the final domain is mindfulness. So with mindfulness, you kind of just realize that something sucky happened, and that's okay. Take a non-judgmental perspective and remember you're human.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So, when I hear the word mindfulness, that's not exactly what always comes to mind about mindfulness. What would you I'm just curious for the group here, what would you consider to be the definition of mindfulness itself? I just kind of want to draw a line between mindfulness and self-compassion.
So, mindfulness, generally speaking, is having this kind of mindful attention or awareness of what's happening in the present moment. And I'm looking right now for, as we talk about this, I'm looking for this really cool acronym that I use in my classes when I teach about mindfulness that breaks down each like letter of the word. So if I can find that, I'll share that with our listeners over our social media. But essentially, you can think about mindfulness as mindfully attending to the present moment. And a really good example of people that do this really great are babies or little ones. So, like, if you imagine a baby who is like less than a year old, maybe even less than 6 months old, they might stare at their hand like it's the most amazing thing they've ever seen before, because in that moment, they are truly investigating and fully aware of their hand and on an incredibly like sensory level. So, we can actually practice a similar mindful attention type exercises or think about it in that framework as, you know, a small child exploring something for the first time, seeing it, smelling it, maybe even hearing what it sounds like. And so when I think about mindfulness as being a component of self compassion, I think it's just reminding us to come back to the present moment in as many ways as possible, because we can't really be compassionate about ourselves until we know that what's happening to us right now. What is it that we're feeling, experiencing, sensing in our environment? That's the way I have always perceived it when I've read about mindfulness in the context of just mindfulness in general, but also in the context of self-compassion.
I see. So when Jen was saying, so when realizing that when something that sucks happens, you can just take a second and realize that that thing sucks. So, like, go ahead and experience that emotion of that moment, but you don't have to judge yourself in kind of this meta sense. You're allowed to experience this emotion of the moment and not have it mean anything about your character or being at
Right.
large.
Non-judging is an important component of
Yes.
mindfulness, is non-judgment. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So we have self kindness. Treat yourself with the same kindness that you allow to other people. Be tolerant of your own flaws. Understanding that mistakes are part of being human and you are, in fact, human. I'm assuming, all of our listeners are human. And that nobody is perfect, that to err is human, of course. Even brilliant people make mistakes. And then understanding each of those moments in the moment and the emotions that are tied to that moment and not being judgmental of that,
Yes.
realizing that our life is kind of made up of these moments and to be present without it necessarily reflecting on ourselves and our value.
And Michelle, all that sounds perfect. Can I share quickly? I did find that mindful acronym that might be helpful. So if we think of the word mindful, so this is going to break down each letter, MINDFUL, with a little kind of saying for each. So M is for moment to moment attention. I, in the here and now. N, non judgmental attitude. So that non judgment piece. D, detaching from unhelpful thoughts. F, forgive and be grateful. U, unconditional acceptance. And L, learning with a beginner's mind. So you can think about how you kind of need each of these components in order before you can really be self-compassionate, right? You have to be attending to what's happening in the moment, in the here and now, be non-judgmental toward yourself, and then be able to detach from those unhelpful like tapes or thoughts that are playing in your head, like what Jenn was saying about her having to learn computer coding and being really hard on herself and having these kind of bad thoughts coming through her head. So you have to be able to detach from those for a moment enough to recognize that they're happening, and then forgive and be grateful. So there's also components of, okay, well, let me have a moment of forgiving myself for being hard on myself and being grateful that I'm taking this moment. And then unconditionally accepting and loving ourselves, and then learning from this entire process to move on.
Awesome. I think that'll be really useful. I think we'll go ahead and put that on our social media so that everyone can, all of our listeners, you can just go look and review that in your own time and see how it applies to you. I think we're going to take a break for just a second, and then when we come back, maybe we can talk about how we see self compassion at work in our own lives. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back. Let's talk about self compassion in our lives. So, can you think of a time, anybody on the call, can you think of a time of when self compassion seemed particularly important to you, or that you feel like it was that you experienced self compassion or a need of self compassion or something like that? Does anybody have any examples you want to share?
I have an example. So recently I sent out an email to over 500 people and I started getting responses. And I realized that there was a typo in the subject line. I was mortified. I was pretty upset with myself. And then I remembered to be self compassionate. Um, so I realized what I was saying to myself and that wasn't helpful. All the mean things I was coming up with wasn't going to go back and fix what I had already done. So I took a minute and I just sat in the suckiness, and it sucked. I was embarrassed. But then I remembered one of my favorite mantras: "This too shall pass." And then I remembered that I've gotten emails that have mistakes in it from other people, such as Groupon. So it happens even when there's a whole team of people working on it. It's part of being human. And hopefully it might make somebody laugh who's having a rough day. And then after I got through that and processed it, I was able to let it go and stop being so hard on myself.
Yeah. And I think that that part is important of processing, experiencing like you guys have been saying, but like experiencing it for the moment, but then just being able to let it go. I actually had something that happened to me a few months ago. I think I might have shared it with you three ladies, off the air, but I think it was kind of a spontaneous moment of self-compassion that I didn't even realize that I was doing it. I do this thing every year, and Chelsea actually does it with me, but basically it's called Run the Year. And whatever the year is, so like this year it's 2020, you're supposed to run that many miles in a year with your team. So we were supposed to last year run 2019 miles. And at the beginning of the year, you have this card that you're supposed to write down a note to yourself for when you finish at the end of that year. And so December 31st or January 1st of this year, I'm supposed to be reading this note. And even though my team met the 2019 miles, I didn't actually meet my own personal goal. And so I waited like a week to open that note because I had this terrible dread of reading this note that I had written to myself, congratulating myself for like meeting this goal that I hadn't actually met. And so it was honestly, I think a week later before I finally opened this note, and I was like, well, I just have to get through it. And what I had written on January 1st of 2019 was, whatever you did was more than enough.
Mm.
And that, just reading that message from myself, it was like I was practicing compassion for myself. And it was really quite touching that I had, let myself off the hook, or even really, I guess it's not even let myself off the hook, but made myself realize that I didn't have anything to feel ashamed about, that I had
Mhm.
tried to achieve this goal, and I had done honestly my best. And it made a huge impact on me. And I wasn't thinking about self compassion at the time. But now that Jenn says that, it teaches us about this, I realize that's really what was happening.
Mhm.
And it emotionally made me feel so much better at the time.
And it's interesting because ahead of time, you were already being self compassionate of yourself. You're like already knowing, I am going to probably need to be practicing self compassion. Like, I know myself this well. And so you wrote yourself that note, right? But then because you hadn't reached the goal and you were judging yourself for it and punishing yourself for it in some form, or at least that's what it sounds like to me, by delaying, saying,
Sure.
oh, well, because I don't deserve to read this, or I don't deserve to actually get the little prize or do the fun thing that was attached to it because I didn't reach the goal, which I had a hard time not interrupting you because I'm an interrupter, but like when you said that part, I wanted to be like, it's okay. It's okay that you didn't reach the goal. Like it's okay. People don't reach goals all
Yeah.
the time. It's no big deal. We are overachievers. We are over planners. We're gonna not reach some of these goals, you know? But it's easy for me to
Right.
say. But it's interesting that like you almost had to not being self-compassionate the second time was almost keeping you from doing or kind of reveling in the self-compassion you gave yourself earlier by reading the note. So I'm glad that you were able to have that
Right.
moment later at least. But yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and when I made the goal, I knew that it was an insane goal. But I figured it was better to try for an insane goal than to do something easy. I wanted to keep striving throughout the year, and I did that. I did keep striving, and I blew away my record from the previous year, which was like my sub goal, or my secondary goal. So I beat my secondary goal, but not my primary goal. So I knew that I was setting this goal into the stratosphere when I made it, but at the end of the year, I hadn't kept the perspective that the goal was in the stratosphere. I only knew that I hadn't seen it. And so that note, and I think maybe there may be a lesson there that self-compassion, we can plant the roots of self-compassion in when we're not in the heat of the moment, that we can maybe lay in some practices or something that will help us revisit it later, or at least make it into some kind of practice.
I like that a lot, Michelle.
I don't know how. I don't know what I'm saying, but it feels like a thing that might be true.
Yeah.
Hey, Chelsea. So we haven't heard a lot from you yet. Is there any part of it that has resonated? Any of this lecture that has resonated a lot with you?
When I was thinking of self compassion, I was mostly thinking about times I wasn't very self compassionate, and other people really opened my eyes to my inner critic. So I can think one, what I thought was one of the worst things that happened to me in graduate school. I took this really difficult statistics class, and statistics was an important part of my training and part of my identity, but I could not keep up. The workload was insane, and I was a research assistant. I was doing all of these other things, and I would be the first or second person into the office. And my mentor at the time came over one morning and asked how I was doing. And I just started crying and saying, I don't know why I can't seem to get this. So, kind of echoing what Jenn was saying, why is this so hard for me? And not realizing that it was hard for everyone and the amount of work was not reasonable. And so my advisor really let me know that I needed to engage in self compassion there, and that it's not failing to recognize that some things don't serve you and aren't good for you or are toxic for you, and to take yourself out of those situations. That is self compassion. It's just in a slightly different way. It's not telling myself, hey, I'm enough, or hey, I'm going to take this bath, but rather getting rid of the things that are really detracting from me and from my goals. So I think that was kind of an important eye-opening experience for me, of learning that self-compassion can be realizing that failure isn't
Mhm.
failure. And I think one of the strategies that I try to use in my everyday life, because we're all busy people and we have a lot of goals and we don't meet those goals sometimes, to move from feelings of shame and focus on, I did this, I made this mistake, or I didn't meet this goal, I failed because I'm a bad person, or I'm lacking something. So moving from shame to guilt, and guilt being a more proactive, albeit negative emotion, where, yeah, I messed up, but I'm going to vow to do better in the future. So it actually motivates you to change, to work harder, to get out of the situation if you need to, but it's not as focused on the self in a negative way. So I think that is, in a way, self-compassion of, it's not always about who I am, myself and my identity, but rather something that happened to me or something that I did. And behavior can be changeable. So making it a little more motivating in that way. Also, when things aren't going well in one domain of your life, you can look at others. So a little bit of self-affirmation in there of, okay, I was not doing so great at my stats class, but man, was I being a good friend and hanging out with these ladies on the podcast. So ways of making yourself feel better by looking at what you are doing well, even in the face of what you might consider at the time failure.
Absolutely. I feel like you had a few good nuggets there. One of them, I love the concept of letting go of what doesn't serve you. That was a thing that I tried to hold on to for a while last year. There was this period of time where I felt like I was just getting overwhelmed by so many things, and so many of those things were not really beneficial. I was holding on to them because, or for somebody else's sake, or because I felt guilty about letting it go or whatever. And I think I like that concept of things, of letting go of things that don't serve you. And then I also really like the shame and guilt. This is one thing that I teach my classes about all the time, the difference between shame and guilt. Whereas, like you said, shame is this sense of I am bad, whereas guilt is the sense of I did a bad thing. So when you feel like you are bad, there's kind of nowhere to go for you. So you feel defensive or angry, because when you say you are bad, it's this evaluative statement and you don't really have a way to change it. But when you say I did a bad thing, which is guilt, then that you can change. You can make reparations, you can change your behavior for the next time. It's something that you can have an impact on, so it doesn't strike you so negatively. So I usually discuss that in depth with my classes when we talk about self-cognition or development. And then the third thing you said about the self-affirmation, I feel like that might be part of that mindfulness piece, where when you're thinking about yourself in the moment, you realize that thing you're having self-compassion about is just in that moment. And there's in that one instance that's part of you, where there's a whole bunch more of you that you could be mindful of, or that matters at that moment as well. It's kind of like it's one moment in a bigger world, that context, I guess. So what do you think, Jen? Does this all seem to be on the self-compassion track?
I think these are great examples and a really rich discussion.
Awesome. So what else do we need to know about self-compassion?
So now that we talked about what self-compassion is, let's talk about what self-compassion is not. So what self-compassion is not is laying on the couch every day, eating cookie dough, watching Netflix all night. If you're not feeling your best, sometimes you have to be compassionate in reaching for broccoli instead of cookie dough, or maybe doing some yoga before you watch Netflix, and doing things that are actually going to make you feel better in the moment and down the line.
I can see that. So self-compassion, like, for example, you don't want to enable other people to do unhealthy things to make themselves feel better. So you don't want to enable yourself to do unhealthy things to make yourself feel better either.
Yes. So you're not just self-compassion would not just be engaging in emotional eating because you felt like it in that moment. It's thinking about being compassionate to your whole self. And does that make sense?
And
Absolutely.
I have this discussion a lot with my husband because we are big foodies. We also both tend to emotionally eat. I know he would tell you that himself, so I'm telling it on the air. And so sometimes we have to ask ourselves, because, it's easy to say, oh, I've had a long day. I'm really stressed out. Let's be nice to ourselves and let's go to Whole Foods. It's our favorite thing. Go to Whole Foods and get a piece of cake or something, because we think we're being healthy going to Whole Foods, getting it. But lately I've been reassessing that and thinking about it as like, well, is that really being self-compassionate? Is that really actually supportive to myself to do that? Because there's all kinds of other reasons that I won't even get into, but you can imagine that there's elements of that is an unhealthy pattern or behavior to do. And so instead of asking myself, how can I be nice to myself today? I've been asking myself, what can I do that would support myself today? And sometimes that means, for me, particularly because I have some medical issues, like what's going to support my body today? What's going to support my mind? What's going to support my heart, my energy? Whatever it is that I'm feeling like, what's happening is taking its toll on. So if it feels like I, need to run and get, for example, like we're talking about emotional eating, like that sugar fix, how am I going to feel afterwards? Or is that actually going to make me feel like I'm supporting myself, or am I actually punishing myself? So I think self compassion can also, I think that mindfulness component comes in and is really important, because you could easily go into mindless mode of let's throw caution to the wind and just do this thing that feels good right now. But is that really self compassionate? I think you could sometimes argue that it's not if it's not supportive to you.
I kind of am getting this picture as we're talking of our inner selves. We have a lot of competing inner voices, and we have that voice that's saying, "Hey, eat the cake," or, drink the wine. And then we've got this voice saying, "You know what? I really need sleep. So maybe go to bed on time tonight." And so self-compassion might be being compassionate to the voices that tend to get drowned out, like the one that's telling you to go to bed on time. Honestly, I think going to bed on time is one of the most self-compassionate things I can do, because I struggle with that so much. But sleep is so important. So maybe self-compassion might also be just separating those voices out, and doing the one, like you said, Angie, that supports your overall health the most.
I like that conceptualization, Michelle, that it's competing voices and it's listening to the one that might end up having the best benefits for you overall. The advice that you would tell your friends or you would tell your close others.
Ooh, I like that. The advice that you would tell someone else, because we do have evidence in the research that we can actually give ourselves good advice if we frame it the right way, or if we are asking that question, like how you would advise yourself if you were advising someone else. I don't know if I phrased that well, but we do know that that can work. And so that I think maybe a really good perspective to think about it, of how you would advise someone else in this situation.
Angie, when you were talking about support, I started to think about support more broadly and how self compassion can also be a good time to seek out social support from others. And I know that's what I do. So if I goof up in teaching somehow or make a mistake in my statistical analysis or something, I'm the first person to run to somebody else and be like, I can't believe I just did this. So we'll use Google Chat and back and forth of, is this right? Did I mess this up? And so talking to someone else and being like, am I crazy? Is this right? Having that validation from someone else and saying, hey, I have to do that too. That's a good form of self compassion, maybe because I'm trying to seek out the support that I need. I don't know. Jen, what do you think?
I think you're right on track. I know that one of the things that helps me the most if I'm not capable of being compassionate to myself in the moment is reaching out to support, just hearing what other people say back to me. But it's catching myself in the moment of like, oh, I'm having not great thoughts. Let me reach out now. And then I get much better thoughts back.
And that sounds to me like, using social support, or at least, it's particularly people who would be that friend we're talking about. Like the whole concept of self-compassion is like treating yourself like you would treat a friend, right? Well, if we know that we have these certain friends, family members, close loved ones that would actually treat us better than we're treating ourselves in the moment, sometimes it can be helpful to seek them for that validation, or at least help us move to that place. But I also think, to play devil's advocate for a second, that it's super helpful to do that with the people that we feel safe doing that with. But it can be unsafe to go into that arena if we're seeking out support in the wrong places, or feeling like we can only be self-compassionate if it's contingent on someone else agreeing with me, maybe somebody who I love or I'm in a relationship with, because then we're actually putting their opinion over ours, and it's not actually being truly self compassionate. So I think the key in those stories you guys were telling were that you were reaching out to people who you knew were those friends that would be able to put it into context for you and help you realize, yeah, you should probably be nice to yourself. That's a normal thing to experience. That's a human experience.
Also, I have instated a practice that Jen taught all of us many years ago, where if you say something negative about yourself, you have to say three positive things
Ooh.
about yourself. And I've started doing this with my research lab and the students that I work with.
Oh, I
So if
love
they
that.
say, oh, I'm so dumb, I'm so frustrated. Why did I do that? Oh, I'm an idiot. I say, okay, take a breath. And now I want you to say three positive things about yourself. And they have to be different from the time that you said them earlier today or yesterday. And my students have started to catch on. And so now, as soon as one of them will say something negative about themselves, other people will be like, 3 positives, 3 positives. And I
That's
love it.
great.
I think that is such a great practice. And all the credit to Jenn because she taught us how to do
I
that. And
remember
I'm going to
that.
pass it along.
I wish you could see my smile. My heart is smiling. I am so happy.
I remember that from grad school when we would say something bad about ourselves, Jen would make us say 3 positive things. Yes, I do remember that.
I
Oh, I
I
should
don't
do
think I
that.
was there. I came later. I came later, but I always go to Jen to tell me something positive about myself. So I totally
Oh,
believe that. Now I'm gonna use it.
absolutely.
Oh, that's
Jen is
funny.
our cheerleader 100%. I
Mm.
mean, that is just who she is. Yeah, Angie, when you were talking about going to people and putting their opinion over yours, that really struck a chord with me because there's definitely been times when I have done that. I've sought some kind of advice or something from somebody else, or not advice. Sorry, I was actually seeking compassion. I was
Right.
seeking the compassion that I couldn't give myself. And I didn't get it.
Right.
And I ended up feeling
Mhm.
worse. So I do think that that is a good cautionary tale to think about, that even though compassion from others is good and you should seek that social support and hopefully you get that social support, to realize that it is, you have to extend it to yourself as well. And if someone else comes back with a negative evaluation, that you can't let that sink you. You can't
Yeah.
let that be the last word on the subject.
And no matter whether that person is right or not, doesn't matter. Like, that's first of all, right or not, it's just an opinion anyways, but I mean, if we place a value on what they say, it kind of erases the whole point of self-compassion because it's for ourselves and we are entitled to it no matter what we do, no matter whether we are actually guilty of that thing we feel guilty about. It doesn't matter. It's just for us to have. And we can share that with our friends if, like I said, we feel safe to do so and it's actually a safe space to do that. But I think we have to remember the self and self compassion.
I agree. I agree. I also think if you do have an interaction like that with a friend, and it's a friend that you normally feel safe with and that you can talk to, if you reflect that back to them, my guess is they will probably backtrack.
Hmm.
Because I don't know, I mean, like any of you three ladies, if I came to you with something that I felt bad about and then you said something that made me feel worse, if I could let you know that, I'm sure 100% that that would not have been your intention. But I don't know, maybe we're getting into the weeds here talking about this.
I'm glad we brought that up though, because sometimes these topics that are really hot in psychology as self-compassion has become and rightfully so. And I think like Kristen Neff, who first came up with a lot of the things we're talking about today, or at least first operationalized them, we call them, kind of define them, study them, etc. I think that the downside of putting these kind of general ideas out there is that sometimes if someone's already being critical of themselves, and people who tend not to be self-compassionate tend to be more self-critical, I think there's research to back that up as well, that can be really harmful, right? So I think we should always be thinking about the kind of the other side of it. So yes, here are all these things we can do. We can be self-compassionate, but what about the moments that are where that's hard? Or what about the moments where we're seeking, other people to validate that and they don't? I think that that's part of, again, that human experience. Like, we have to acknowledge the difficulties in order to, make the gains, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, let's take a break real fast and then we'll come back in a minute and we'll talk maybe about the strategies and activities that we can use to incorporate more self compassion in our lives. So we'll be back in one moment. Okay, so here we are back, and I think we're going to finish up by talking about the activities and the strategies that we can utilize to increase self-compassion in our lives. So, Jen, why don't you start us off with that?
Okay, I have a couple different ones. So, one of the first ones is to think about the system. So, there's so many things around us that we might not have control over. So let's say you get a new phone and then you go out to happy hour. You accidentally butt dial your boss and he overhears you, or she overhears you, discussing which martini you should get. So are you an idiot for butt dialing your boss, or did you just not know how to lock your phone because it's totally different from the old version? And then there's a new quick key that calls the last person in your contacts. That's kind of out of your control, and that's the design of the phone. That's not you being an idiot. So being kind to yourself, just thinking about the different complexities of the environment and the systems that we're in. Then, additionally, to recap some of the things that we've previously discussed, you can ask yourself, what would you say to a friend in this situation? Next time you're like, I can't believe I did that. Instead of calling Michelle or Chelsea or Angie, you could just say, like, oh, what would they say? What
Mm,
would I say if they were to call me in this same situation? You can kind of even feel that like the emotions change internally when you're thinking of a friend calling you with that same situation. It's kind of a cool thing to be mindful about and feel the changes in your body. If you realize that you can't be compassionate to yourself at that time, you can call or text a friend to get their perspective. Also, you can think of when others have made mistakes. So we can all agree that Queen Bee is a goddess, but even she makes mistakes. There's multiple videos of her falling on stage at Coachella, making New York headlines saying that she fell. She just laughs and gets right back up. So if she can do that, we can do that.
And by the way, Jen's talking about Queen Bee like we're all her best friend and we all know her, but she's talking about Beyonce Knowles, just in case you don't know who Queen Bee is. But here in Houston, she is Queen Bee because she's from Houston. So keep going, Jen. Just wanted to slide that in there in case somebody who's not a Beyonce fan is listening.
Wait,
Like how we're like,
somebody's not a Beyonce
I know. I was like, she's not
Yeah.
going to be able to like qualify this in her head as possible, but I'm just going to
So
help her out here.
I know.
I can't either,
Yeah.
honestly, but
So,
I'll
all
give him
right.
a
So, what I'm
pass.
hearing is ask yourself what you would say to a friend if someone came up to you and said that they were in that same situation that you're currently in. What you would you say to them? Or if you can't wrap your head around that, then, or if it just doesn't work, then you can actually think of someone that you can call, think of that friend that you can reach out to, that social support to reflect that compassion back to you and put it in some perspective. And then in the cosmic sense, I guess, in the global sense, you can think about the fact that even people who seem like beyond our reach, like Beyonce, someone who just seems like they do everything right or have everything together, if they make mistakes and can laugh about them, then surely we can laugh about our mistakes as well. That mistakes are part of that human condition. It goes back to that statement of what you were talking about with self-compassion. Did I hit the high notes?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Does anyone have any final thoughts about self-compassion that they'd like to share?
I just want to reiterate that we all deserve self-compassion. And if you find yourself punishing yourself, that I would encourage you to start, thinking in that moment about how you can reframe that into self-compassion. Even if you think you don't deserve it, just give it a try. We are telling you deserve it right now. You deserve it.
I would 100% agree, because I feel like if you are seeking it, if you are at a point where you feel like you need it, then that means you deserve it, because the people who don't deserve it don't ever feel the need for
Mhm.
it. If you are such to the point, which I don't know that anybody is, but it just theoretically, if you are such to the point where you are so far gone that you don't deserve compassion, you wouldn't be seeking it. So the fact that you're even feeling a need for it or seeking it means that you do deserve it, I think.
Yeah, and trust yourself on that. Trust yourself. Not not the tapes in your head, but like with that feeling, like if you need that, there's a reason why you're feeling it.
Yeah. Chelsea?
I would just say that my mantra that I like to say over and over again is the perfect is the enemy of the good. And so just stop being a perfectionist. It's not going to get you anywhere. Realize that good is good enough and move on, because I think that that's helpful.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you so much, ladies. Especially thanks to you, Jen, for giving us this lesson on self-compassion. And thank the rest of you ladies for joining in the conversation. Hopefully our readers find this helpful. Did I call them readers? Our listeners find us helpful. And you can tell I was working on my book today. So,
Oh shoot.
yeah. So anyway, thanks for everybody for being here, and listeners, thanks for listening. Before we sign off, I just want to underscore the fact that none of us speak for our respective institutions. institutions, that all of our opinions are our own and they do not belong to our institution, and you can't hold our institution responsible. We have to take the heat ourselves. So I want to put that out there, and also be sure to check us out on social media. We do have a podcast website, and then we are present on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So definitely check us out, and hopefully we'll see some comments from you there. Thanks for joining in, everybody, and good night.